Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Well, Tony, I'm sure much like our audience, it doesn't take that much to get me excited for, hey, college football season is coming quickly, but this has been a tremendous, 24 hours or so for, hey, I'm pretty excited that college football season's coming. We got some kickoff times for the Buckeyes. We can talk all about that. You can get that all in the morning show, the Buckeye Smart Morning episode that's dropping on Thursday afternoon with Kevin New, and we may talk about that later. I don't know. We'll see. But also, man, some actual people got to play EA Sports 2025. It seems like this is going to be maybe worth at least some of the wait.
Yeah, and certainly, everybody's certainly going to get their money's worth when they start playing it. And Tom, I will also mention that watch list season is right around the corner. I got an email about that, said, hey, here's the award watch list schedule. Getting ready to go in July, so the most exciting time of the year, the Remington Award watch list, the Ray Guy watch list, all of that stuff that everybody looks forward to is right around the corner as well. And yeah, so it is the official start of summer. We've got camp starting next week, and they'll be going for two and a half weeks or so. So we'll be there, and plenty of stuff to talk about then. First time with the show, I do want to mention something that I wrote about this week, which was Mylan Graham, incoming Ohio State freshman wide receiver Mylan Graham, because I don't think we've talked about him lately. And since I wrote about him, I'm like, hey, let's use this podcast to talk about something that I wrote, because we don't do the one thing we don't do enough on this show, Tom, is talk about stuff about me and that I do. So I'd really like to use this as a vehicle for myself personally. But so every year I do this series of taking a closer look at all the new incoming players, be it freshmen, be it transfers. And, you look back at them. I've got clips of their highlights in high school, and I wrote about it on BuckeyeHuddle.com on earlier in the week, so you can go find that there. But for a while, I think probably since he got injured last year, he's been a little bit, not necessarily out of sight, out of mind for me, but that injury, and he eventually came back from it and played, but that injury along with the summer enrollment has kind of put him in the back burner of my mind in terms of what to expect from him this year. But then cutting all these clips of what he actually does on the field has me again thinking, boy, this guy is as special as we thought he was before, but he kind of disappeared for a little bit. And then I think Jeremiah Smith, that hype has also exceeded everything. So I just wanted to spend some time on Mylan Graham and what we are expecting from him. And Tom, with him coming in June, this is not the deepest room that Ohio State has, but we've seen the thing that I wrote about a little bit was, could this be the Chris Olave track? Because like Olave, he was a summer enrollee. Everybody else has almost been a January enrollee. So there is precedence here for that to happen, where you enroll in the summer and then you eventually become a member of the rotation.
And I think you've got some similarities to Olave beyond just the summer enrollee. Olave missed a season of high school football because of, wasn't it a transfer or something? It was, he missed some time in high school, and a lot like Mylan Graham was rated relatively low when Ohio State jumped in on him, and everyone kind of went, what are they going after this guy for? And then all of a sudden he ends up as one of the top wide receivers in his class. So there's a lot of similarities there. It also, you look at some of those teams, that 2018 Ohio State team, some of the wide receiver depth there, certainly didn't pan out. We didn't necessarily know it at the time, but you look at the bottom of the depth chart there, and it was kind of like, there's a bunch of guys who never did anything at Ohio State at the bottom of that wide receiver depth chart. So you may have some similarities there. With Mylan Graham, for it to be a 5-star wide receiver who's coming in, who's like an under-the-radar 5-star wide receiver, this is pretty much what you would need to have, because that seems so counterintuitive that who could forget about a 5-star wide receiver? Well, if he misses a bunch of time, he got hurt the weekend. Was that the weekend of the Notre Dame game? Because there were a bunch of people who were at his game, and he got hurt and really didn't do anything because it was, you had a bunch of Ohio State media there, and it was like, okay, this is the perfect opportunity for him to really have a big game and get gassed up. And then he got hurt and really didn't do anything that week. So that happened, missed some time, wasn't in for the spring. You've got everyone and their mother and their brother talking about Jeremiah Smith. And so it's, he's the other guy. He's the other guy in the class, and he wasn't there in the spring. With as not particularly deep as they are at wide receiver, he does feel like someone who could come in, and there's not as many different guys that you have to kind of scramble over on the depth chart to get to the field. So there are certainly going to be opportunities early in the season. They're a 50.5 point favorite against Akron. So there will probably be some second half snaps available for Mylan Graham in that game. But given how shallow they are at wide receiver this year, assuming he comes in and they look at him and goes, he's someone who could potentially contribute this year, he's probably not someone that they're going to be real careful on snaps because, boy, we might want to redshirt him. 5-star prospects are generally, unless they're on the line, generally not 5-year players. So you're probably not trying to save a year. So it's just, for him, it's going to be, when is he high enough on the depth chart to get a significant number of snaps? And given the fact that there are, fewer guys in there that he would potentially have to climb over than even a few months ago when we were already talking about them being thin, it feels like there's a pretty clear path to the playing field for him in meaningful first half snaps, potentially by mid to late regular season.
And I wonder how long we'll have to wait before we know that he is going to be one of these guys that will get better and better, and then maybe by October, November is in the rotation. Because you'll recall when it was fall camp of 2018, it wasn't long before we started hearing really good things about Chris Olave from the coaches, from teammates. So they were talking about him pretty quickly. And so it was like, okay, turns out this 3-star maybe he can play, and maybe we shouldn't just ignore him. We will be able to ask Denzel Burke at some point. He'll let us know how things are going with Mylan Graham, and it'll be interesting to get him in early in camp and then ask him later in camp, as we did not necessarily with Jeremiah Smith. We asked Denzel Burke at the bowl game about Jeremiah Smith, and he's like, wait till he comes across, we're facing off against a college cornerback, then we'll talk. And then later in the spring, he's like, he's pretty good. So we won't necessarily have that amount of time between the examples for Denzel Burke, but it will be interesting to get his viewpoint on this, because as we know, as the show always says, he is the Ohio State arbiter of truth as things in the Woodies. So that how quickly we start hearing stuff about Mylan Graham, I think will tell us a lot, which is totally unfair, but is also, that's how it's worked in the past. And especially if we're going to use this Chris Olave example, but it's not just him. I mean, in the spring, we hear about guys all the time. It's like, okay, well, let's pay attention to those guys. So we'll see how quickly he starts making a name. And so then in terms of the expectations, Tom, in terms of numbers, we always like over-unders. We like setting numbers here. So I went and, I've got this freshman history of Ohio State quarterback or receivers, and I've taken the top 4 off the board, which is Chris Carter, David Boston, Garrett Wilson, and Ted Ginn in terms of catches and production. So I've taken the next 10 below that, which I think is 40% 5-star guys. So the next 10 below that, Tom, it's Carnell Tate, Devin Smith, Deron Carter, Chris Olave, Dane Sanzenbacher, Marvin Harrison, DeVere Posey, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and Emeka Ibuka, and even Ray Small in there. I think that's 10.
Can I just guess? I'm going to guess you're going to give me an average here of these guys, and I want to throw out because I think what's going to happen is these numbers are going to be very similar to what I'm sort of thinking is realistic for him. So I'm going to say somewhere in the neighborhood of 10-ish catches, 10 to 12 catches for 280 yards and like 1 to 2 touchdowns. How am I doing?
Well, Tom, the rundown has the numbers exactly.
As typical for show prep, I didn't do any. So I was busy reading the article after that. Yes. So how did I do on do on the numbers?
Pretty close in some aspects. The over under. So the average season for those guys all totaled is 11.5 receptions. So that's set that number at 11.5. The yards, 158.5. And the
Yeah, I guess
touchdowns
that
is
probably
1.5.
I would have had him had the average as at 28 yards per catch, which would be pretty high. In retrospect, listen, this is how you know I'm doing this off the top of my head. Feeling good about the catches. Oh, let's focus more on the catches. And now how about the touchdowns?
Touchdowns, 1.5 touchdowns.
Right,
so I mean, that's one game.
Yeah. I mean, so we're looking at like 10.5 catches,
11.5.
Oh, sorry, 11.5 catches, 158.5 yards, 1.5 touchdowns. Okay, I think honestly, these all feel like pretty realistic numbers. I would be, barring injury, I'd be pretty surprised if he went significantly under those. And I'd be fairly surprised if he went significantly over those. That would be obviously great news for Ohio State. You know, that if he's putting up significantly better numbers than that, you obviously do have more opportunities with more games. And if you're playing a bigger role later in the season, you know, the Chris Olave track, remember Chris Olave scored a couple touchdowns in the Michigan game. So Chris Olave went over in 1/2 of one game against Michigan. So I'll say, well, let's see. I'll just say over on all three, because otherwise I will be a hater. And that's obviously that's more your role on the show. But I think those are realistic expectations. And, you know, if he goes 15 catches for 210 yards and 2 touchdowns or 3 touchdowns, like that's a tremendously successful season. I think, and this is the time of year when, you know, like if you ask the average fan, like what, you know, how many Ohio State running backs are going to run for 1,500 yards this year? You like, well, at least 2. And, you know, maybe we'll see how much James Peoples does. This is the time of year when everyone is optimistic and everyone's going to go over every possible number.
Mm-hmm.
Those are very good, realistic baseline expectations for him in terms of what a successful true freshman season could look like, especially if you're just enrolling in the summer.
Do you know how many of those 10 have gone over on all 3 of those numbers, Tom, if you want to take a guess, between 1 and 10?
Well, okay, you didn't say 0, so that's good. I'm going to say 3.
2. Devin Smith, 14 catches, 294 yards, and 4 touchdowns as a true freshman in 2011. And Chris Olave with 12 catches and 197 yards and 3 touchdowns. And as I'm scrolling through here, I think only 4 have been over on 2 of those, which is pretty surprising. Like Marvin Harrison was only over on the touchdowns. Mm-hmm. And, you know, looking here, Dane Sanzenbacher was over on the catches by 1. Deron Carter was over on 2 of them, but only had 1 touchdown. If he catches 1 more touchdown, he's up there with the all-time greats. But that's a tough ask now. And when you look at, if we use Marvin Harrison as the example, 11 catches, 139 yards, 3 touchdowns, under on 2 of those numbers over on the touchdown. That situation, his situation in that offense might be similar to Mylan Graham's in terms of where you are on the depth chart, because there are some really good players ahead of him. There's not a lot of depth around them, but the top line is very top line. And so it might be difficult to get those numbers. But as we keep saying, they're more intent on getting more and more players and getting the starters out as much as they can. So maybe there will be more options, but they're also going to want to be running the ball and things like that. So to say, like, of course he's going to get 12 catches. I mean, who's not going to get 12 catches? But you're talking about over the history, and I use that in quotes, like you're talking about 9 guys that have gone over 12 catches in terms of freshman wide receivers at Ohio State, true freshman wide receivers. That's pretty crazy. And names like Marvin Harrison, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Emeka Egbuka, Julian Fleming, Jamison Williams, they're not among those. Michael Thomas, Angelo Chathams, like these guys that we talk about all the time, Bam Childress, they are not in that number. And so I feel like the safer answer, more so than your all 3 over, is all 3 under.
Realistically, yes, that's probably more likely. Probably the hard part of this is the 2 seasons where guys went over were 2011, which is probably the single worst Ohio State offense I have ever seen in my entire life. That was the game where the season where they only won 6 games, and one of the wins was on the road at Illinois, and then completed one pass. One pass completed, 1 for 4 for, I believe, 17 yards and a touchdown to Jake Stoneburner, I think, in that game. So that's one end of the spectrum. And the other end of the spectrum is 2018, which is the year that Dwayne Haskins basically lit the Ohio State record book on fire. So if this is either a very good Ohio State offense or a very bad Ohio State offense, you got to like his chances. That's what history tells us, right? Devin Smith, why did Devin Smith do that in 2011? Because there was no one else there. That was the year that Urban Meyer called the wide receiver room a clown show. The Ohio State wide receiver unit has not been a clown show at any point since Brian Hartline arrived. I'm not expecting it this year. But are you trying to get Emeka Egbuka off the field and keep him healthy, and you're trying to keep some of the younger guys healthy? And how much is Jeremiah Smith going to really be able to play? Is he going to hit the freshman wall at some point? These are all things that you've got to kind of consider. Brandon Inniss was hurt during the spring. Does he stay healthy all season? I mean, all of this stuff sort of factors into these questions, and a lot of it is going to just be dependent on playing time, as you said. Are they going to try and get guys in, get guys out, and get the younger guys a ton of reps in the second half? Maybe. Are they going to try and pile up some pretty numbers for guys to get guys some All-American spots? Could be. Are they trying to run up some style points at some point? Maybe. I don't know. I mean, there's just a lot of, what's the weather like? That's another thing that we have seen control passing stats over the years. Which quarterback is it? How run heavy are they on the offense with Chip Kelly now calling plays? All of this stuff factors in. So, broadly speaking, I think those over-under numbers are probably pretty good ballparks for where he might end up. And if he's under on 2 and over on 1, then, that could still potentially be a very good season. And remember, you talked about Marvin Harrison going over on touchdowns. I believe all 3 of Marvin Harrison's touchdowns that year came in the Rose Bowl, and that was only because Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave weren't playing. So therefore you had all of these opportunities open up, and then C.J. Stroud is dropping dimes to Jackson Smith-Njigba and Marvin Harrison that whole Rose Bowl. So, how is that going to go this year? I'm not expecting a lot of opt-outs in the postseason for Ohio State this year, so you can probably cross that one off the list. But, there are a lot of factors that can go into what these numbers end up looking like ultimately that are probably completely outside of Mylan Graham's ability and development.
I think if I look at these 3 numbers, the one that I would be most confident in, it feels like it should be the 11.5 receptions. But again, 12 has been pretty difficult to do. 2 touchdowns seems like it's much simpler to do, because that could just be 2 catches. That's a much more attainable number. And you look throughout the freshman history of Ohio State receivers. Dino Dawson did it in 1984, 4 catches, 2 touchdowns. Chris Olave, Marvin Harrison, Devin Smith, and Ted Ginn, and then the top 4 all did it. Ted Ginn, Garrett Wilson, David Boston, Chris Carter. And the 158, about the same number. Actually, Carnell Tate did it, Devin Smith did it, Deron Carter did it, Chris Olave did it, Emeka Egbuka did it with 9 catches. And so maybe it's the 158.5 that seems to be the most attainable for a freshman. And when you got a guy who was a big play guy like Mylan Graham, that could be 2 or 3 catches, and then you set him aside and wait for next year. But I would probably, if I had to bet on one of those, I would probably just go touchdown, because it's like, I'm going to go down swinging on that one. It's like, that could happen at any time. I'm going to be like rooting for guys to opt out. Like, you don't need to play in this playoff game. You can wait until the semifinals, trying to get those 2 touchdowns. But then the last question for me is where are those touchdowns coming from? Where is he playing? Because
the 17 and 34 yard lines.
There you go. That should count for more, honestly. That should be that's an instant winner across the board.
How did he hit exactly 2.5 touchdowns? Well, he gets an extra bonus when it's from the 17 or 34 yard line.
Perfect. So then it would be a push if it's like 1.5 or whatever. But when we talked to him back in June at last year's camp, he was talking about, I'm going to be an outside receiver. Jeremiah Smith is going to be like the X, and and Mylan Graham would be like the Z. Jeremiah McClellan would be the H in that, the slot in that, and then there was another guy that they were working on trying to be as an outside guy. But you lose Jeremiah McClellan, and Mylan Graham did say at the time that I can also work in the slot. Hartline wants him to look at the slot a little bit. So then I'm watching his senior film, senior huddle highlights, and he's in the slot quite a bit, like more than I had seen him before, more than he was as a junior and a sophomore. And so that had me thinking, like, this was not just, perhaps it's just a high school thing. It's like, yeah, we see everybody trying to get their best receiver in the slot to get matchups, but also it was good practice for what we might see for him this year. But then you look at, like, the easier track would probably be outside in terms of playing this year, because you're talking Emeka Ibuka is probably in the slot, and Brandon Ennis is there, and Bryson Rogers is there, and they don't necessarily have enough outside guys that you could just roll in and keep going when you've got Jeremiah Smith is probably starting at Z, Carnell Tate at X, and then who is behind them? Jaden Ballard is perhaps a Z in there. So they're not as deep on the outside, even though Mecca can play wherever and he's going to make you deeper. So I think with Brandon Ennis and Bryson Rogers in the fold in the slot, then I guess he's going to be outside, even though he played a lot in the slot last year.
He did, and this is one of these situations where if you ask Brian Hartline where he's going to play, you're going to get, oh, our guy's going to play everywhere. They do. This is not just coach speak. They do have guys. They move guys around a whole bunch. You saw Marvin Harrison in the slot, and Marvin Harrison is, pretty much the prototypical outside receiver, but they're going to put him in the slot, as you said, to get matchups. Mylan Graham, he's listed at 6'1", 170, which is exactly the kind of, not 6'3", 6'4" kind of outside receiver. He's more of a prototypical slot receiver in the Ohio State offense, but that's not an easy path to the playing field. So if it's me, I think, as you said, I think you're looking at him maybe more as a Z, and then sure, you slide him inside, and he could play in the slot. I'm sure he would be perfectly fine playing X. I think they're probably in pretty decent shape with Carnell Tate there as the starting X, and then you'll probably see a little bit of Emeka Ibuka out there at times, and you'll see Emeka Ibuka everywhere. You will probably see Jeremiah Smith everywhere as they just try and move guys around and get matchups. So, this is one of these conversations that this is an extremely May conversation, because by the time we get to October, it's going to be like, where's Jeremiah Smith playing? It's like, oh, well, wherever they need him. Where's Mylan Graham playing? Oh, wherever they need him. Like he'll be moving around a lot, and it'll depend on the play. It'll depend on the drive. It'll depend on the matchup. But that's what they're looking for. They don't want guys who are pigeonholed that, they went through this period where they were recruiting like a bunch of 6'5" guys to play X. It's like, well, we have our tall guys to play X, and we have our 5'10" guys, and those guys are always going to play in the slot. And if you look through the history of that, and so that's, 2000, that's like 2017, 2018, 2019 kind of recruiting classes, a lot of those guys didn't pan out because it was like you were sort of pigeonholed in this one spot, and if you can only play in the one spot, then it's hard to get on the field. And, sometimes that doesn't necessarily set up a great matchup for you. So they are trying to move these guys around and have these guys be flexible. That has really been what has worked. And, the guys who have been flexible like that have been the ones who have played the most and had the most productivity over the last few years.
Yeah, I think the other concern there is how much do you want to ask a freshman to do in terms of outside and inside, because Hartline has been careful with that before. Carnell Tate was able to do it last year, but he was a rare freshman. So we'll see where Mylan Graham falls in that. I wasn't expecting to talk about Mylan Graham for 24 minutes, but we have. So I do want to spend a little bit of time on the EA College Football 25 game that the embargo was lifted on. A bunch of people were able to go down to Orlando and play the game for a couple of hours and see presentations on it. And so this happened last week, and they were finally able to talk about it on Thursday. So I lost a couple of hours of time when all of that stuff started dropping, and I'm trying to pay attention to it and listen, watch podcasts and listen to things on what is available, what the game is like. And the answer that I was waiting for is that this is not Madden. This is not Madden gameplay. And what everybody was saying is it's much smoother than Madden, which was always a concern because it was always better gameplay, better. It was always smoother than Madden. So that was the concern, was that it was just going to be a Madden thing and it was just, college uniforms. And so that made me feel a lot better. After reading a lot of this, I'm not concerned, but this game seems a lot harder than it was back in the day, because they've tweaked a lot of things, Tom, and we've got the whole list here on the rundown, but like the way you throw the ball now, you can hold the trigger button you have to do that. And then you've got like this gauge in terms of, do you want to float it? Do you want to fire it in there? And if you hold it too long, you're going to be throwing it into the ground basically, because the accuracy wanes with this. So I'm probably going to be starting out at junior varsity level just to get a feel for things.
I do like the fact that if you hold the button down and try and throw it too hard, you throw it into the ground or throw it right into the chest of an underneath defender. They call that Joe Milton mode. The whole thing just feels so elaborate. Start going through the recruiting piece. Recruiting, well, is there a transfer portal in there? Oh, you betcha. Can you encourage players to go in the transfer portal? Oh, absolutely you can. But the passing is more complicated. They talk about the option offense. The option offense is like the reverse of before, where before you'd have to hit X to hand the ball off. Instead, now you hit X to pull the ball, because really that's the quarterback's decision. Is it's going in there, and then the action is, do you pull it out? That's, I do have to tell you, Tony, there was he wrote about running the triple option with Navy. I've talked about running the triple option with Navy in the past. That is to say, fair warning for anyone trying to start a dynasty with Navy, as it is tough sledding out there. That's a little concerning to me, Tony. I don't care for that. But overall, it just feels like everything is much more complicated, where a quarterback who gets hit, well, if he gets hit by a defensive lineman, that's going to impact his ratings for that game much more than if he gets hit by a corner. So if you will have guys have their ratings just plummet if they take a hit. All of this stuff, the running game, the offensive line is working as independent guys and not just kind of as a unit. All of this stuff seems much more complicated, much more, it feels like there are many, many more opportunities for things to go poorly for you. And this is realistic. This feels like the jump from Tecmo Super Bowl, where it's, well, there's 4 plays. And if the defense guesses one of your 4 running plays and they guess it exactly right, well, you get swamped. And then going from that to like a full playbook in the mid-90s or so, that felt like a huge step forward. This feels like a similarly huge step forward, where there is going to be a significant learning curve on this game, I think. And some of the early games, we talked earlier about the 2011 Ohio State offense. I feel like you are going to have a lot of people that third weekend of July looking like they're running the 2011 Ohio State offense, because it might be ugly for a while.
Don't get online right away and start playing these games. Play in your own sandbox for a while, do a bunch of junior varsity and build yourself up. I think some of the tweaks to this thing, and citing an article from UpRocks, and so you don't need a subscription or anything, and you can go check it out. And there's some good stuff there on the gameplay and the dynasty mode. But the writer said one of the guys I was talking to had to lead a game-winning touchdown drive with his backup quarterback because his starter got hit so much he had lost 47 points off of his rating. So it's like, you may start the game as an 82. By the fourth quarter, you're going to be like a 40 if you keep getting hit. And the other thing about this game is they say it's much harder for a small school to beat a big school, because all of the ratings are serious now. And you can, your 88 receiver can just dominate a 62, Emeka Ibuka against whoever from Akron is probably just going to have a field day, or J.J. Smith or whatever. So, this is concerning me with my North Texas plans. Now, granted, it's only going to be 3 or 4 non-conference games against some bigger schools, and I'll just have to toughen it out. I'm not expected to win those right away, but it's going to be just demoralizing to you can't do anything to stop them, and they just keep throwing it over your head, or I'm going to be cutting so many players, Tom. I'm like, you are done here. I don't ever want to. I'm cutting players at halftime. I'm going to Kayvon Pope them out the door. Like, you're gone. I don't want you around here anymore. You get beat one more time, I was recruiting your brother. Forget it. He's off the table. And so some very emotional moments will be had in this game. I would expect some broken controllers from all of the new, this is not going to be the game you remembered based on what we're reading here in terms of some of the play is going to be, it's all football play, but like it's going to be a little bit more. You're going to need more time than you probably have. You used to have more time 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago when you would play this game. You're going to have to find some time. So babysitters, I don't know what it's going to take. Quit your job. You have to do something about it. You've been waiting for this game. And so, there is a lot of stuff going on with this. And I do like the option move where you have to hold the button to pull it out. And then, of course, you can pitch the ball. The harder you hold down the left button determines how hard you pitch it, how far you pitch it. So that will be interesting. And I do think once we're finally playing against each other, I did see some clips of some people who played Madden. You can only score via lateral. And so I saw like clips of one game that ended up like 2-0 because one of the laterals ended up as a safety. So, and I also think maybe a game where it's the punt block defense, but you only are allowed to throw deep. So you've got the one deep safety back there. So a lot of things you can do with this game, obviously.
I had on either a PlayStation or PlayStation 2 about 20 years ago, there was a EA Sports put out a rugby game, which was wildly, wildly fun. And it basically was, you can only score via lateral. And so, yeah, this could be a great way for us to bring that back. I guess if, as long as you're playing with a team that's the North Texas caliber, maybe I'll be okay with Navy. We'll see. Talking about quarterbacks getting hit too much and, the ratings dropping, I feel like I'm going to need about 8 quarterbacks on my roster if I'm going to run the triple. That doesn't feel like that's going to go well. The one thing with some of these playbooks is this is a much more detailed playbook, apparently, than in the previous iterations of the game, where little interesting, quirks from each individual offense. The 2 examples they cited were the really wide splits, the wide receiver splits from Tennessee, where the wide receiver is sometimes outside the numbers, and the long mesh that Wake Forest runs, where they're running the option, but they're like the quarterback is handing the ball to the running back, and they're like walking together, forwards towards the line for a second or two, much longer than a typical mesh point. So you've got some of the interesting little details like that. I will be fascinated to go through some of the other offenses in the game and some of the defenses in the game to see what you can do. The last thing, Tony, that was really interesting, the quarterbacks with a lot of awareness, you will see, if the quarterback looks up pre-snap and sees a cover 4 defense, there's going to be a 4 that pops up over the defense. And, okay, I recognize that you're playing cover 4. However, sometimes the quarterback's wrong. It's like, oh man, this is a level of reality I do not need. Like if you're in a cover 4, I know what I want to do, but then I don't want to be wrong. That's really pretty deceitful. I don't care for that at all.
Yeah. And one of the other aspects of that quarterback thing is, after you call a play, you get up to the line and you hit like the right trigger or whatever, just to see where everybody's going. Like in this level, with the quarterback awareness, sometimes the routes will be wrong, or they'll just be like a question mark over one of the receivers. It's best to remember what play you called and where everybody's going. That way you're lining up and you look over, where are you going? And he's just like, I don't know what I'm doing. It's like, okay, here we go. And then of course the weather is also going to be a factor, which has sort of been, but even more so. So there's going to be a lot of frustrations in people learning this game and dealing with it. Fortunately, the one thing people no longer do is complain about stuff. So they'll be happy with it, however they've gotten it. And everybody will be able to go on their message boards and social media and say how happy they are. It's been a long time coming. We don't need to speak with the manager. We've got the game. We'll play it as is, and there will be tweaks along the way. But so there you go. 30 years of Dynasty mode. You can do custom conferences. You can create custom schedules. Although the one article I saw said that you can create custom schedules, but the schedules, like Ohio State schedules out till like 2030 on a non-conference. So that's in the game as well. So however long you put it, the schools return to their schedules to EA, that's out there, and you can create your own universities, your own teams, things like that. So a lot of the stuff that people liked, you can't create recruits any longer, and you can't import draft classes because of the licensing aspect of it. Because Emeka Egbuka gave you his license for EA college football, he did not give it to you for Madden. So they're going to have to fix something there. I don't know how they're going to be able to do that because Madden pays a lot more for the NFLPA than this does. So that may just be something that never happens. But, it is what it is. You can't have everything. And also, this is kind of like the iPhone. They can't give you everything or else you won't buy the next one. So, like, we've got some stuff that we want to add to it. Like right now, you can't do crossplay and an online dynasty in terms of you can't be Xbox versus PS2 or PS5. Definitely not PS2. But you can do crossplay and just like an online season. But these are all things that could be added down the road. So there you go. I have not purchased mine yet. Have not made the big splash and get the expanded edition or the special edition to get it 3 days early. But we do still have like 50 days or something like that.
Yeah, I haven't purchased a gaming system yet, so I'm behind where you are. However, I did notice this comes out the weekend right before Big Ten Media Days, so you might have to bring a gaming console to Indianapolis with us, and we might spend some quality time working on our game while we're there.
Yeah, I was thinking that exact same thing. There's going to be some hotel rooms with a bunch of video games going on there in Indianapolis over those 3 days. So that will do it for us. I want to thank you all for tuning in. And of course, if you're watching this on YouTube, please go ahead and give us a thumbs up. We would appreciate that. And of course, you can find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. As always, wrapping up our spring sale there. So join and become a member now for the year for a low price of under $70. So do that now. We would appreciate it. And that will do it for us today. Thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you guys later.